Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the University Startups Demo Day. So we'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully you find a lot of information in this webinar to help you around the University Startups Demo Day process, as well as identifying some companies that would help your startups get developed to IPO as well as lead to Fortune 500 exits. So I'd like to let you know that the University Startups Demo Day that we're doing is going to be on October 16 and 17, and it's only one of 3 programs that are highlighted at the event. So the flagship event is actually the University Startups Demo Day. Then we also have the IP to Startup program that we talked about last week, and hopefully you guys are able to see the video or join us then. And the third is the Investor Roadshow, and we'll talk briefly about these events later, and we can go ahead and get into a little more detail. So before we officially start, I'd like to let everyone know that we do have questions. We'll entertain questions at the end of the webinar. You'll find that you have the your questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen. You can enter your question there, and we will queue it up when we do the Q&A later. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so if you have colleagues that you think would be interested in learning more about the demo day, but they are unable to join us today, please go to the webinar page. We will have the slides and video under its specific link 24 to 48 hours after the webinar concludes. And if you would like to watch more videos or more webinars that we've done, the last few months, you can join our YouTube channel or subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get notices on new uploads. Again, we'd like to let everyone know that this webinar is specifically for the University Startups Demo Day, and we'd like to let everyone know that the early deadline is approaching. It's going to be on July 14th. So if you have startups in your university that you think would fit the criteria and the eligibility for the demo day, please submit them, and we'll see how they do. And as far as we know, submitting early is always the best thing. It'll allow us to take a look and see if your applications have any errors, and that gives us enough time to help you correct them. Also, from the last 2 demo days, we've seen that about 2/3 that submit, the 2/3 usually submit the week before, but those that usually get selected and get better scores are those that submit early. We really don't know why, but we can't leave it to chance. So if you have the chance to submit early, we encourage you to do so. All right, and this is the last slide before I introduce the speakers. We do have some upcoming webinars over the next few weeks. Next week, we'll be talking about the University Angel Group, about creating it at your university. So it's going to be on June 21st at 1 p.m. Then after that, we have a couple of corporate webinars that, especially if you're thinking of submitting, the one on June 22nd will be about corporate needs broadcast. So this is a series of webinars where we feature members of the corporate selection committee to talk about their technical needs. So if you're unsure if your company would be a good fit to the demo day, these corporate needs broadcasts would be a good source to know what Pfizer is looking for, or what Lilly is looking for, or PepsiCo is looking for. So I suggest you sign up for that. Then the last is a webinar for corporations that are interested in open innovation and venturing. So that series will start on June 28th. All right. So enough about me and more about the panel. So today we'll have 5 speakers, and leading the panelists today is our Executive Director, Tony Stanko. Dr. Glenn Vonk, our Director of Business Development and Alliances, will also speak today about the model that we employ to get your startups in, and how to develop them further for funding and IPO. Then after that, Vicky Scarborough, she's one of our startup development officers, will walk you through the mechanics of the demo day and more details, about the submission and how the companies are going to be scored. And also joining us, it's a privilege to have two members of our Startup Officer Leadership Council, Steve Nappy from Temple University and Dr. Helena Wisniewski from the University of Alaska Anchorage, will be speaking about their experience when they put their companies into the demo day. Their experience and their company's experience will be a good benchmark for you as well.
So I'd like to introduce now our first speaker, Dr. Glenn Fong, to start us off today and talk a little bit more about the background of the demo day. Glenn?
I'd like to just begin with a little bit of background for you to introduce the topic of today. So NCET2 was founded out of George Washington University 14 years ago by Tony and Ria, and the whole focus of GW is always NCET2 has always been on university startups. There have been a bunch of iterations through that, but as NCET2 has continued to develop, there has been more and more interest in commercializing technology through university startups. My own background in corporate America in the medical device business at Becton Dickinson saw a tremendous shift from doing a lot of internal R&D to doing almost everything externally focused, at least in the early stages. So as we were doing that, we had been doing the standard kind of research collaboration, sponsored research types of agreements, but we're getting more and more interested in startups because startups move quickly. They have a great deal of focus and they can leverage external resources that were not available to us. So that increased our reach. And I became aware of NCET2 because NCET2 was working with university startups. So we began to attend the conferences, and we found at the conferences that there was a lot of fragmentation in the ecosystem. Universities had startups, but they weren't finding corporates. Corporates were looking for aligned startups and not finding them, and there was a lot of frustration all the way around. And the investors, kind of in a similar position to the corporates, looking for viable businesses that they could invest in. From that dialogue that occurred between all the members of the ecosystem, we developed, I think, a fairly coherent view of what that ecosystem looks like, which is shown on this slide here. And it begins with the federal funding for the university research and the government labs and corporate R&D. Some of that ends up as university startups and in innovation districts within the universities. So in an innovation district, typically you have university infrastructure, you have startup development officers there, you may have a corporate presence and certain technology verticals within the innovation district at the university. At some point, these startups all need to interact, usually with large corporates, to understand what the market forces are to build the kinds of partnerships that are going to sustain them through their development. Our metaphor for this is the Corporate Commercialization Council, and this is where we interact with our external corporate network. So the idea here is to bring all these parties together. So once a startup has made a relationship with a corporate and validated their business unit, then there's an opportunity for gap funding to move that concept along and de-risk it to a point where it can obtain private funding, shown here, first with university angels, then ultimately venture capitalists and corporate VCs, where they will be eventually an exit of some kind. NCET2 supports the development in the ecosystem through the following programs: an intellectual property university startup program, which was the subject of a previous webinar. The next one would be the demo day, which is aimed at connecting corporates to viable and aligned startups. The third phase would be facilitating the funding activity, and then the final phase would be helping them establish the links that are going to really propel them into a mature commercialization initiative, either as an acquisition or as a standalone company. So that gives you a sort of a whirlwind tour of the ecosystem, I think that I'll leave you with this. Oftentimes, we're trying to improve the system by creating more startups that are really aligned with what corporate and customer needs are. So that's the early stage IP to startups. Helping people find the kind of match that's really going to be work for them, whether they're a university startup, university, or corporate, or an investor, which is the demo day, and then helping to move that through the ecosystem, which are the last two phases in the investment continuum. So Vicky's going to tell you a lot more about how the demo day works, which is the focus of the webinar today. So Vicky, over to you.
Thanks, Glenn. So basically, the U.S. Demo Day is industry-created program, as is indicated in the model. It's really an opportunity for corporate open innovation and venturing groups and venture capital folks, angels, and so forth to discover your university startups, partner with them, and so forth. On the next slide, we start to get into more detail about the USDD. So what is it? It's every 6 months, the University Startup Demo Day engages with universities to accept about 200 or so of the best university startups. And what happens is we then take our corporate group of our membership, who then score those startups for whether they have basically a resonance with that startup and whether or not that startup is providing technology solutions that they have an interest in pursuing. And it's really great because these are then double curated. First of all, you at the university level have carefully chosen a startup to put forward. And then the business community and our membership have an opportunity to view the startups and choose the very best ones that align with their interests. So that's really how the system works. So next, basically, you've got to be a startup. It's open to all North American universities and startups. So basically, you can cover Canada and Mexico as well as the US. And the startup has to be affiliated with the university. It basically was funded by a university. Maybe the IP is owned by the university and so forth. So really, that's how we're trying to keep this affiliated just with the university partners. So then what happens, we have all kinds of startups, basically. We have startups that can come in at a seed level or a startup very early on, and basically they're looking for corporates to partner with, perhaps investors. And then we have folks who may need more money than just a typical seed group would get, basically more in the $1 million range, and they may exit in a couple of years to a company as an IPO or be acquired. And then there may be some startups out there that are exit ready and that are ready to be acquired. So they may be 2 years out from being acquired from somebody. So there's a number of levels of startups that we're interested in talking to. I know we get a lot of comments from our corporate membership about some of the startups being too early. And in that case, we work with those startups to try to find out what it would take for our corporate membership to be more interested, and what would how much further along do they have to go before they become more attractive to our corporate membership. So here's how you do it. You submit your startup through our website, inset2.org, submit startup. There's a number of buttons on the website now that allow you to do this very easily. It gives you a number of steps to fill out: the company description, the affiliation, the technology readiness level or the commercialization readiness level is on there. In other words, just to see where you are at in your process, whether you're really early on, or do you have some proof of concept or field trial information that puts you a little further along the commercialization path. what technical area, what vertical you're in, the value proposition of your company, and who are your team members, and what are their qualifications. What's your IP status? What have you filed patents? Do you have patents already? Have you licensed technology from the university and so forth? And then your sources of funding, whether you've got an SBIR or funding from angels or other sources, the friend and family funding. And so one thing we do encourage you to do is just stay at a very high level. Don't give us anything that's proprietary in your submission. Don't give away the secrets that you hold dear. Basically, we just try to understand who you are and what you're providing. And then we have an application form that's a sample that you can look at to see what it looks like. So basically then the corporates are going to review it. The corporate members are going to take that information and they're going to start to score it. We developed a scoring sheet for them in order to really see how it resonates with a business plan, with a business case. So while you as a university have technology that you want to pursue and then put forward in a startup, corporates are really looking for something that resonates with their business and their business needs. And so the form was designed to really align with that. And when you align the technology with the business need, that's when you really have a great, your traction is much greater. So the opportunity for discussion will be happening at the meeting with the startups, with the corporates. So what are our technical verticals that we have interest in? And here we have the companies that are in each of these verticals that have interests in pharma and medical. A lot of pharma companies there listed, and some of them that you might have a surprise, like Sony, for example. You don't necessarily think Sony is interested in pharma, but they are. And so that's kind of a surprise to some people, but it's good to know that, and you wouldn't know that unless you were participating in our program. Advanced manufacturing, again, there's a lot of material science interests here. Clean tech for water and things of that nature, and information and communications, IT, augmented reality, virtual reality, and so forth. Big data, IoT, all of those things hit in that vertical. And then consumer-facing platforms that are more in the area of food science and cosmetics and retail applications and so forth. So a lot of folks who practice or sell products in the retail space. So those are the verticals that we have, and those are the companies that really line up into those verticals who would be interested in things in that area. These are the companies that we have so far. We're adding more every day, and the group is really very diverse, as we mentioned earlier with the verticals that they're interested in. They have diverse interests, and sometimes some that are a bit of surprise to folks when you start to talk to them. Because again, Sony is a consumer electronic company, but they also have interest in health and pharma. So yeah, you don't know until you actually interact with some of these companies exactly what their interests are. And that's one of the reasons why we provide corporate webinars to showcase their needs and so forth. So those are always available on our website. But if you were going to come to the meeting, you would likely be meeting with some of the people from these, setting up meetings with these folks, and having detailed discussions about the technology needs that they have and the technology that your startup can provide. So the startups are going to be scored by the corporate committee, and as listed earlier there. So it's a score of 150. So really it looks at the management team, the technical feasibility of what's being proposed, the commercial viability, feasibility of what's being proposed, the strategic fit with the corporation. Sometimes people have startups that think that they're going to answer a lot of questions for a lot of companies, but then when they actually talk to the company, they realize that they've missed the mark a little bit and they're not quite the strategic fit they thought they were. They may have to pivot somewhat in order to make a strategic fit better. And then project attractiveness, you know, how attractive is this proposal? And then operationally, what would a company have to do to make this thing happen? Because usually they're looking at it from a manufacturing point of view, whether there's an opportunity to just incorporate this very directly into their existing business, or where they're going to have to spend some money in the operation to really focus and get this thing commercialized. And you know, that's a big decision for most companies to invest in a manufacturing change. And so there's always that. So there's a score there, and that's something that only those companies will know, and universities don't fully appreciate because they're not manufacturers. So, you know, why would you want to do this? First of all, this is giving you exposure to multinational companies, gives you an opportunity to set up the relationships with them, get connected with them, and to meet one-on-one with corporates who have a strong interest in the technology. And this brings you together in a way, all in one meeting. You can do a lot of business in one meeting. So if you have a very strong startup, you may have a series of 10 meetings at our demo day that maybe 3 or 4 of those will end up being something that really pan out. And in the last meeting that we had in April, we found this to be true. We had some great startup companies presenting, and there were a lot of meetings, and some of them were extremely pleased and had no idea that some of these corporates would be that interested in them. So it has a lot of advantages for the startup and for the university as well. It gives an opportunity for us to meet the startups and find out where they are in their development phase. And, you know, INSET 2 has a lot of resources to help find startup development officers if they need some assistance, they need board members, if they need folks that can provide business backgrounds to them, and to then work with these guys to set up milestones. And so that's really what I try to focus on, is helping the corporates set milestones with the startups so that we can make a better arrangement with the two and leverage what each has and make sure that we don't miss anything, that we actually make a connection, that we have something that productive occurs. And then there may be some funding milestones that this startup needs. For example, if they have some SBIR funding that's about to end, then they may need some more funding, and we can look at that and determine where that funding might come from and connect them with other investors that might be able to help them. So there's a lot of advantages for the startup in working with the INSET 2 team. So Tony's going to come in and talk a little bit more about the back end of the process in terms of the investment and how things work for that. And Tony, this is yours.
Okay, thank you, Vicki. So here we go. Next slide. So one of the things that we're developing is the startup development process. So the thing to kind of remember about our demo days is that they're not the end of the process, they're actually the beginning. Once the corporates figure out which startups they think should be moved forward, that have potential to be significant market players, that's where we kind of come in and help get those startups to those milestones and to those exits. So in our startup development officers, they're ex-corporates, you know, that have been on the corporate side, so they know how to deliver to the corporates what the corporates need, and also mentor angels, and I'll explain that a little bit more, and university tech transfer officers that have, you know, been involved in this for a lot of years to really get things, you know, outside the university into startups and move them forward. So next slide. So this is the slide Glenn showed at the beginning. And really what we're talking about here is the bottom part. So if you look at the Global 1000 Corporate Commercialization Council Center, the coordination center, there's 4 arrows in and out of that box. The arrow out at the top is the IP to startup. So the corporates are telling you what they're looking for, so you can have IP that's responsive and startups that are responsive. The arrow in from the innovation district, that's the demo day. Those are showing the startups. And then after those are processed, we know which startups, you know, the corporates are interested in. And then we start working with those to get them funding, which is the 2 bottom arrows. But part of that, you know, figuring out who's to get funding and what kind of funding is the next slide here, which is, I believe, the commercialization readiness levels. All right, so I'm not sure you can read this, but basically we've created with the corporates this opportunity to really have an industrial process to get it from the lab to an exit. There's actually 2 scenarios here, and I'll show that in the next couple of slides. But you kind of see these are commercialization levels, and in some ways they're similar to technology readiness levels, but in a lot of ways they're different. And what's really the difference is we're mapping who's going to fund which part of this. So that is part of the key piece here. It's knowing you know, who's going to fund CRL level, let's say 4, to get it to level 5. And that's not a trivial thing. That's actually the biggest problem. You know, I mean, everybody calls it the valley of death or gap funding. It's very specific, actually, though, what people are going to fund. Most angels, we know, and VCs especially, aren't going to fund something that doesn't have sales. VCs, in the most cases, there's always exceptions, and it really depends on how quickly you get to the exit. And in some cases, if you have software, you know, they will fund software without any sales because you could get to an exit very quickly. But if it's a drug, for example, you're not going to get to an exit very quickly, and so there's a lot of gaps here. And then you need to map where the money's going to come from, who's going to supply it in what area. So anyway, you kind of see it goes from the research, then there's a startup piece, then there's a business plan piece. Once you have the business plan, proof of concept, operational, prototypes, products, and then sales. And then sales are really where you get the serious money from the private investors, and it's getting it. Usually the problem is getting it from 3 to let's say 6, and that's where we can help. The corporates will tell us, you know, where they want to exit, and we kind of back it all up and figure out what are the milestones, like every 6 months to a year, and who's going to fund those milestones. All right, Ria, next slide. We'll actually say a lot more about this. This is getting laid out. If you remember that graphic, the main thing that's been laid out of the model so far is the demo day. That's the thing that has a pilot and 1 real event. The IP to startup, we're starting that this cycle, and these other parts we're kind of working already with the startups that have come through the process to get them the angel VC money, but this will take a little more time to kind of lay out. I mentioned there's really 2 different models here in a sense, and it's also technology specific, but you get a sense if you don't if you don't work too much about the detail. Basically, these companies, if you're going to get angel VC money, have to have an exit. There's just no way for them to make their money, especially because so many lose out and they wash out completely everything they've invested, that they have to have winners, and there's usually 1 or 2 in their portfolio. And so that winner has to really have an exit to cash out, and it has to be a big winner. But there's two different scenarios. One is a quick exit and the other one is a longer exit. The basic difference between route 1 and route 2 is, do you have to build out, does the company need to build out the large scale manufacturing and distribution? And as I said, we'll get into this a lot more, but if you're going to go for a quick exit to a corporate, to a Fortune 500 company, they have the manufacturing and distribution. They just need the product. So all you have to really do is show them that you have a viable product that has significant global sales potential. But then they will take that product, like when the company has $1 million or $2 million, roughly, give you probably $25 to $50 million to do all that de-risking up to that point, and then they'll drop that into the distribution and manufacturing lines and take it worldwide. And so you kind of just need to get it to CRL 6, 7 under the scenario. And that could be, it could be 2, 3, 5 years. Shouldn't be longer than 5 years. 5 years is actually a pretty old one. Next one. So the next one here is going for a full, all the way through and becoming either a standalone company through an IPO, or like a major M&A transaction with a corporate and, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars worth of sales and value. So here you kind of need to get VC money. VCs, kind of come in at $5 to $10 million, and valuations are up, $10, $20 million. They need an exit that's 10 times that. So it really is a very different thing. And you have to have sales for that, for the most part. And again, you have in this scenario, the company needs the VC money to build out the manufacturing and distribution, especially if it's going to be a standalone company for an IPO. Anyway, those are the two routes. There'll be another webinar that'll describe this particular development process, but we wanted to kind of show you that there's a lot of gears behind this model that really is going to be much more of an industrial process, more than just the way things have been happening. There's going to be a target corporate at the end, or a bunch of corporates at the end. There's funding along the way, and there's actual milestones along the way. All right, thank you. I think that's my last slide.
All right, thank you, Tony. So I'd like to turn over the microphone now to two of our university representatives that are part of our leadership council. So the first, basically to talk about their experience when they put their companies into the demo day, what happened, what benefits they received, as well as what are the follow-up activities that they experienced during the process. So I'll introduce our first speaker. He is the Associate Vice President for Technology Commercialization and Business Development from Temple University, Mr. Steve Knappe. So Steve, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Ria.
Hi. So I'll put up your slides now.
Okay, so thank you, Tony, and thank you, Ria, for the opportunity to participate on this panel. And just as a quick snapshot, Temple is the second largest research institution in the Philadelphia area, with about $260 million in annual research. That drives our innovation pipeline, and for the most part has been significant in the past 5 years, where most of the activity has been generated. So that is about 380 inventions that have come in over the past 5 years. We're now at a rate of about 120 per year, 120 or so patent filings, 16 startups. We have a portfolio of over 32 startups total that are active, and we've generated about 15 million in the past 5 years at a annual rate of about $1 million to, depending on where our later stage deals are. So we can go to the next slide. Where we focused our energy and investment is really on the movement of technology, and we've used a partnered solution with key accelerators, and that includes an initiative that we created with Ben Franklin Technology Partners called Temple Ventures, powered by Ben Franklin, which is an early stage seed fund for our companies. We have a partnership with the University City Science Center in Philadelphia for phase 1 ventures that helps draw in government funds, and the program invests alongside those SBIR, STTR grants. BioStrategy Partners looks at pharmaceutical leads, and we work with 2 large pharmaceutical companies through that accelerator, as well as Amtech, which focuses on more device-oriented technology. How do we get to prototype and then go ahead with the build? And then, of course, our continued relationship with NCET2, and I'll explain how we connect into that in just a second. On the right side, our startup portfolio is 85% in the medical space. So that's why the acceleration programs are important for our particular portfolio, in that we have a long runway, higher capital need with our intellectual property. So we can move to the next slide. And fortunately, as part of our priority in terms of moving technology forward through a spin-out company, we do make every effort to align that startup with a strategic partner. So regardless of the type of technology and the accelerator that it might move through, we do try to link up with a large corporation, and it may be for simple mentorship. It could be a more structured relationship. It could be from an investment perspective, but we do want that feedback. And that is why Demo Day was attractive to us. Is it really focused on bringing those key stakeholders together on that partnered model to help advance startups. In addition, it in our case helped get the startup investment ready, or at least pitch ready. So it did provide an incentive to really polish up the message, polish up the materials, get the company ready for prime time. And down at the actual event, connected that company as well as us in the commercialization office to the industry partners to get that direct feedback, as well as investor and government reps. I would say, as an additional benefit, it is hard for these small companies to really gain the exposure that they need to make important connections that can help them advance. So the ability to be part of NCET2's marketing efforts around the program really did help bring needed attention to the startups that were selected. And furthermore, since that travels throughout the university, it did demonstrate the importance of startups as a vehicle for moving our technology forward. Now, there are, of course, some challenges when it comes to getting people to cooperate. Or getting their attention, because there are a lot of events. And we found that for the most part, we've been able to get our startup companies interested in this particular program. And furthermore, we've made it into more of an event to also bring our startup team together with the startup companies and their teams to really touch base at the meeting and see where else we can add value, and have a direct download from the meeting and come up with new strategies live. So it's become a nice a regular meeting spot, I guess, for us to do business with our startups. Next slide. So in terms of results, we've had about 6 companies that have participated in the program for presenting. We continue to receive large pharma interest on one of the companies that is developing a therapeutic lead. And in addition, in the last meeting, we had 2 presenting companies, and both ended up with significant interest at the event. For example, Polyceramics is developing battery technology and had about 9 meetings that were facilitated at the demo day. Then went on to win their first investment from phase 1 ventures. Resenza, looking at a psoriasis treatment, was selected following the event for a $50,000 grant, and also received some additional exposure from the Bio Conference, as well as a local venture group here. So 3 out of 4 is a good hit rate for us, and Demo Day definitely provided that momentum. And I would just point out, also points to the importance of the selection process that's been employed here, since it's obviously picking companies that are of interest. So we can move to the next slide. And that really wraps up my talk. And as a member of the Startup Officer Leadership Council for ANSET 2, I know that they are expanding that intellectual pipeline to include intellectual property that doesn't have a company yet formed around it. So I think that's a nice, exciting opportunity to expand our participation in some of the ANSET 2 programs. And as Vicki mentioned, I think the continued mentorship that comes along with the program is really a key asset. And in many cases, with limited resources at the university and startups, establishing that critical milestone is key to moving to the next step. So I'll wrap up my talk then.
All right, thank you very much, Steve, for your, for presenting what happened to your companies after the demo day. I hope like the universities on the call found that experience useful for them to decide if they would like to put their companies forward as well. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker to also talk about how her university participated in the event. So she's the Vice Provost for Research of the University of Alaska in Anchorage, and I'd like to present to you Dr. Helena Wisniewski. Helena, are you there?
Yes, I am. So good afternoon, everyone. Although here in Alaska, it's still morning for me, but I'm very excited to share with you my experience with the demo day. Rhizoform was one of our newest startup companies, and as Vice Provost for Research at UAA, I do form the startup companies with the inventors. That's one of my roles. And Rhizoform was in an early stage, and we weren't quite sure whether we should submit it or not for consideration, but it had a really compelling story, and a prototype was already built, so we thought we would give it a try. And I'm saying that because if you're wondering at what stage should you participate in Demo Day, you could do it at an early stage, excuse me, or a later stage. So Rhizoform, just to give you a little idea about the company, its products and advantages is that it is a biodegradable thermal insulation materials made from natural products, mushrooms, and forestry byproducts. There's no plastic pollution, no waste streams, easily customized to meet our values and shapes. And the markets are insulation, housing, packaging, shipping containers, and coolers. And we're hoping that it'll be a potential replacement for styrofoam. So it has huge potential. And where our business model is to fully develop an engineered system to manufacture insulation board and other bioinsulation products. Its co-inventors and co-founders are our professors Amos Stolovsky and Yang. Okay, next slide. The benefits that we found from attending the demo day were numerous, and one was publicity. As a new startup or startup in any stage or any company, publicity is always beneficial. And we received a lot of publicity from ANSET 2, from UAA and others, but that publicity led to TV spots locally, as well as other opportunities, which was really important. We had the opportunity to make a presentation to corporates and potential investors on Demo Day, but not only the general presentation, but we had one-on-one meetings with them subsequent to the formal presentations, and those were extremely beneficial and led to other opportunities that we're taking advantage of. We also met with our federal legislators, Alaska Senators Sullivan and Murkowski and Congressman Young. That day, they set up immediate meetings with their colleagues, which led to follow-on calls. So you're getting the idea that the networking was terrific, and that's one of the really big benefits. But these meetings with the senator's colleagues were in areas that were aligned with Rhizoform. As I said, we'd really like to be the next replacement for Styrofoam, and many of these committees that they were serving on are dealing with cleaning up our oceans or our waterways, which are cluttered with Styrofoam type products as well as other debris. We will not be able to clean up the oceans, but we could prevent further pollution, or that would be one of the goals. There's a point I'd like to share is that there's a continual follow-up with NCET too for additional contacts. So it's not just a one-time deal. So just coming to the meeting has a lot of benefits, but then there's continual follow-up. And right now there's a discussion with some potential investment from China. So it's a huge opportunity. The USDD complements programs that we have at UAA, and it provides a platform to get exposures and funding for startups. And that's very important because you really want to be, what we really do and anyone really wants to do is to be able to get their startups as much exposure as possible, and not only meeting with potential investors, but meeting with other startup companies to hear their lessons learned or with their experiencing and how you could fold that in to your company, to be able to form partnerships with other corporations or startup companies. And we found that very beneficial. So the interactions with NCET 2 continue, and we find that really great. And you may know, I think that Tony has shared this with others, that they do have a partnership that they've announced with a capital partner in China for $1 billion, where they're interested in investing in university startup companies and startups here in the US. And that's a huge benefit. So they have many networks that go beyond just Demo Day.
All right, thank you very much, Helena. And let me conclude this part. So we're going to begin Q&A in a moment, but as you know, as people mentioned, you know, we do encourage your university, or if you're a startup, to submit to the Demo Day process in order for you to get scored by members of the corporate selection committee. So you know, I put in a file on the, you should find it on your GoToWebinar control panel, the sample application you can download from there, as well as links to where you can find the technical areas and when the first deadline is. So I'll proceed now with the first question that we have lined up. Are university incubator companies considered affiliated with the university and eligible for Demo Day? So let's see who'd like to answer this. Glenn or Vicky? Would you like to?
Sure.
Yes, either one of us can answer, but the answer is yes. They're affiliated with the university, probably the incubator sponsors a lot of the research from there. So yes, the answer is certainly.
All right, thanks, Vicky. I'm moving now to the next question. I'm an angel investor. How can I invest in the companies going through Demo Day? Tony, do you want to take this?
Sure. So there's a lot of opportunities to invest. If you remember the CRLs, there's different places where angels can invest. Just kind of need to know, you know, what level you want to invest in, and basically what kind of risk do you want to take on. Do you want to take on the early risk of moving it, you know, from the lab to the prototype? Do you want to take it from, you know, prototype to product? Do you want to take the risk of, you know, the first few millions of dollars of sales? So once we can map you to the CRL levels, then it'll be easy to kind of figure out what kind of companies to show you. You know, I guess the other area we need to know is what technology areas are you interested in. So if you're interested in, you know, one of the 5 categories, and then we know what the CRL level is, we'll just map that and you'll see those companies, and we'll let you know which corporates are interested in them. And, you know, then it becomes part of the team to figure out the milestones to kind of get through to an exit for you. So that's one way to kind of take in companies that come through the demo day. Because the corporates are interested in a lot of companies all the way to exit, we are also showing not at the demo day, but what we call a roadshow, companies that you might have in your portfolio, you know, that might already be some further way along to an exit to a corporate. We would have to show them and make sure they're interested, but if we find that they're interested, we would kind of bring your portfolio companies in to show them as roadshow companies. So hopefully that helps. And also, let's see, just the last thing. So Helena mentioned the Chinese fund. So that's actually pretty exciting for us. $1 billion over 10 years as a minimum. Actually, it might even be more than that. Just to be clear, those are financial investors only that are trying to get money out of the country. The startups stay here. The IP, they don't get access to the IP. They actually don't even get access to management. So basically, it's just the money that comes here, and it's going to help a lot in getting some of these startups funded, especially through the gap portions. All right.
Okay,
Vicki, Glenn?
thanks, Tony. Oh, sorry.
Well, I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything, Vicki or Glenn, but otherwise, we can go on to the next.
All right. The next question is there a fee to submit? I can take this. No, there's not. No, so submission is free for companies. There is no fee to submit your company to the demo day to get, you know, scored, and eventually, if you get scored high enough, to get selected. I think this next question is also a very relevant question. Are the universities expected to come to the event with their startups if selected? Vicki or Glenn or Tony, do you want to take?
Yeah, I do want to, let me start, but I think Glenn and Vicki, you might want to say a few words on this too. Yeah, it's really important that the university comes because what the corporates have told us is that, you know, startups are pretty good across the country. The technology is usually pretty good across the country, in some cases even better, you know, in the unusual, not the usual suspect places. So Boston and Silicon Valley does not have, you know, the best technologies in a lot of cases. They actually don't have the best management either in a lot of cases. What they do have is the ecosystem. So one of the things that, you know, we ask that the universities do is come and show the support of the startup and to show that there is an ecosystem and talk to the corporates about the ecosystem that will support the startup. So we'll help obviously with our development program, but, you know, a lot of this has to be local. And so, you know, the university being a big supporter of the startup and what it can do, and also any local angel VC money or whatever, right? There's a lot of different things that have to happen locally. And that's very important because that's a big determinant as to whether, you know, the corporates will believe that the startup is going to make it, you know, to an exit or to a successful partnership. But Glenn and Vicki, I think you have some experience in that regard too.
Well, I would add that having the universities attend is beneficial for the university to learn and network with corporates. They don't always understand what the corporates are interested in, and having that exposure, being able to sit and talk and understand what the corporates are interested in. As I pointed out earlier, who would have known Sony was interested in healthcare? So you really have to come to the conference and spend some time and not just go in and out. Really work the conference as a networking event, and as Helena pointed out, you know, the networking is fabulous, and there's just so many things you can learn by sitting down with folks. So my feeling is that when the university comes as a benefit, it's not just time lost, it's time well spent.
Yeah, and maybe Steve and Helena can also say a couple of words before we move on about on this question, if you have anything to add.
I think it's an excellent opportunity for the universities, for the startup companies. It gives them a really good experience to formulate thoughts and to actually see what other startup companies are doing, which is very beneficial, especially if you're a new startup. Lessons learned are always very helpful. So having the actual startups come is really important.
Yeah, I would agree with Helena. I think that the ability to see how the other companies present was very helpful to our companies and where they can improve, what other companies did right, where they can learn to avoid certain mistakes. So I think being open in that audience and seeing that lineup of companies was very helpful for all of us. In addition to, as has been mentioned, the networking, but not just networking with a large crowd that may include many different types of participants. This is a very targeted opportunity. So for us, it's a high concentration of the people we actually want to network with.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, and we might not have any more time for questions. However, I'd like to, let the audience know that if you had questions in mind, or if you had questions lined up that weren't handled on the call, you can send your questions to usdemoday@nced2.org, and we will get to those questions. We will respond to those questions via email after the webinar. And also you can use this email address if you have other questions about the process going forward as well. So before we conclude today's session, I'd just like to remind everyone again that we encourage everyone to submit early, mainly for your benefit. It gives us enough time to go through your application more thoroughly, so we could see if there are mistakes or if there are errors there that you need to correct. And it has always been the experience, like for Steve's companies and Helena's companies, they've always submitted early, and maybe that's why they've been so successful with finding with the networking opportunities and putting their bringing their company together, because they it takes planning to submit the information to the demo day. So again, the first deadline, or the early deadline, is on July 14th. So hopefully you can make this deadline. We have 2 submission portals open, one for startups and companies, those that are interested in submitting to the demo day for a presentation slot in October, and another portal for IP or technologies that will be featured in the IP book. So both the startups and the IP will be scored by our corporate selection committee to find the market alignment and to see their relevance to the current industry. So again, please submit early. And make sure that, if you have questions, you know where to find us, and you have our email address, or just go to our website and you can live chat with any of our support staff. So just as a reminder, we do have some upcoming webinars. And for those that are interested in submitting to the demo day, I'd like to call your attention to the Corporate Needs broadcast that starts on June 22nd. We'll send out an announcement pretty soon on registration for that series. But for next week, we'll talk about creating a university angel group to fund your student, faculty, researcher, and alumni startups. So this is co-organized with Kent State University. And on June 28th, we are holding a webinar specifically for corporations that are interested in open innovation and venturing in practice. All right, so thank you everyone for joining us. I'd like to thank our panelists today, Steve Nappy, Helena Wisniewski from our Leadership Council, and of course, members of the NCED2 team, Vicky Scarborough, Glenn Vonk, and of course, our Executive Director, Tony Stanko. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good afternoon.